Welcome to Tales from the Trenches, Season 4. Today, it is my honor to have fellow Canadian Mike Dirksen with us.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in his own. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests. The podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Mike is the founder of BuildGood, a fundraising growth agency that helps nonprofits in Canada and the U.S. increase revenue from new and existing donors, with a special focus on improving the lifetime values from first-time giver to legacy leaver. He's also the host of the top-rated nonprofit podcast, the BuildGood Fundraising Podcast, and convener of the BuildGood Summit in Toronto, a 2-day showcase of fundraising innovation and inspiration that brings together 300-plus fundraising leaders. But his most important job is husband and dad to 3 kids. Outside of work, he loves spending time at the cabin with his family and reading biographies.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jack. Good to be here.
You know, I'm going back to that Art of Giving book by Bronfman. He says that you should be boards and everyone should have about 10 to 20% of what he calls noble failure. And willing to kind of put aside some money, and because you're never going to learn. He's a huge philanthropist, but you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. And he had a whole bunch of charitable initiatives that failed horribly, and it wasn't for lack of desire. I can even think about in a former life, we had a funder for a program, and the program didn't meet its objectives. And they were petrified to report back to the donor that it didn't meet its objectives, right? Because we're never going to get any money from that donor again. I said, no, we went into the agreement with the best of intentions. We weren't, trying to take the guy's money and, do something different with it. Sometimes programs don't work.
Yeah. Bad news, it didn't work. Good news, we know this isn't going to work.
Yeah. Or we can say, hey, but we know what will work.
Yeah.
A, B, and C won't work, but B, C, and D will. And maybe, and you kind of learn through the schools of hard knocks.
Yeah. Yeah. So action always yields information, right? And so either we're going to learn this works or we're going to learn this doesn't work, and it'll point us toward a better place. We advocate for 7 to 10% of your fundraising budget to be for innovation, and innovation is things that may or may not work.
Right.
Innovation stands in complete opposition to efficiency, and sometimes even effectiveness, right? So when you're innovating, it's not going to be efficient and it might not be effective. That is the job of innovation, is to chart a new path that somebody hasn't gone down yet. And we're going to have to chop down a whole bunch of trees to make this little trail. And maybe it will lead to somewhere that will provide fresh water, or maybe it won't, and it's going to lead nowhere. But what if it leads to fresh water? It was very inefficient and ineffective at the front end. But now that the trail has been carved, we can make it wider and we can go back and forth and get as much fresh water as we want to, right? And so that's where innovation feels so scary, because it's inefficient, it's ineffective by design. If it was efficient and effective, we would already be doing it.
Yeah. And, and it's just further complicated. Apple at one point wanted to have a car, right? And they dumped billions into it, and they abandoned it and said, you know what, we're not doing it. It's just not going to work. And that's fine because they're a Fortune 500 company, and that's easy to do. But if you're running a shelter and you have a program that fails, there's actually clients that can't get services because you use that money in an ineffective way. So there's that whole thing in front of you. So that's why, sometimes you look for carving aside an innovation fund that's there. So like that's the parameters for it. And, if you set aside $100,000, need 100, sorry, we can't do it this year. You got to wait till there's more money in the innovation fund. So that they aren't kind of taking it out of the operations. It's a separate fundraising initiative. And I think that there's a lot of donors who get excited by things like that and will back the organizations.
Yeah. It's a great example of the homeless shelter that you talked about, and like, well, if we do this and it fails, what if you do it and it works, right? Like, how many more people can we serve? And what if the innovation is asking 5 people, will you fund the failure? Like, will you give us, you want to put some risk capital up? Here's all the things that could go wrong. But if it works, here's what that could unlock.
Right.
And, are you going to help us carve this path? We'd love to do it with you.
And so if you were to hire a fundraiser today, what are the top 3 traits that you would look for in a new hire?
Yeah, so I want to say that I'm not we're a direct response firm. We help organizations find new donors online and retain donors and build monthly giving programs and mid-level programs. We never go in and help them with hiring or HR. So I just want to be clear about it at the outset. So all I can do is I can talk from my experience how we do it at BuildGood when we're hiring people, which is we don't care about degrees whatsoever. That may or may not relate to somebody's listening to this. They might say, well, we need a degree in social work for this position. Totally cool. But if we're talking about fundraising, we don't hire for degrees. We don't care if you have a CFRE or not. None of that stuff matters. The number one skill that matters is curiosity. If you are naturally curious, that is like table stakes in fundraising. You just need to be insatiably curious. You need to be curious about your donors, about their lives. You need to be curious about what might work, what might not work. You need to be curious as an in-house fundraiser, what's happening in your organization. You are like an internal investigative journalist. You better be asking tons of questions because you have to translate that to donors later on. And sometimes you have to translate what donors are saying back to people in your organization. And so you better know the language that donors speak, and you better know the language that your internal program team speaks. Because otherwise, you're just not going to be successful. There's going to be so much friction and misunderstanding that you run into. And so I would first and foremost hire for curiosity. There are some proxies that can tell you whether somebody is curious. We look at resumes a little bit, not a whole lot. But if there's a resume that comes in, I just go right to the bottom of the resume where they list some of the other things, like other activities that they're into, right? So we started out, you said, oh, you read biographies. That's interesting. Well, if that was on a resume, if somebody said, I like to read biographies, immediately I'm like, okay, you're very curious about the lives of people. That is a good signal, right? That's a good signal. So curiosity is number one. Do you listen to podcasts? If you ask, like, in your free time, what do you do? If you've got time to kill, you've got an hour to kill and you're doing dishes, what are you going to do? Are you reading a book? Are you listening to a podcast? So those are kind of proxies for curiosity. That's number one. Number two is like a real sense of ownership. And this is I hope I don't say anything controversial here, but this seems harder to find, generally speaking. It's like, can this person truly own their work? And is it somebody who appreciates autonomy to do their work? It's important in fundraising because fundraising there's not going to be an SOP, like a standard operating procedure for how you fundraise. It's not the kind of job where you follow very defined systems and processes. Hopefully you have lots of systems and processes in place, but fundraising happens in the magical in-between space of following the process and working the plan. And then like when that plan meets reality, right? It's like that Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan on like when they step into the ring until they get punched in the face. So it's how you react to that. And that requires a ton of ownership. That just requires somebody to really own their job. And you asked for 3. One of the things that oftentimes we talk about in fundraising is like, they got to be extroverted. I don't buy that. I don't buy that for major gift fundraising. I don't buy it for mid-level or for mass fundraising. I don't think being extroverted is necessarily something that you have to have. I think introverts can make phenomenal fundraisers. I think maybe what we're trying to say is this person comfortable being in situations not of their own making and how they react to those situations? And so that's a lot more about how a person approaches problem solving. Like, are they a good problem solver? And again, there's some proxies for that. We ask future-based situational questions. So instead of tell me about a time where you had a disagreement with a coworker, instead we ask like in the future, like if you were in this situation and this happened, walk me through how you would approach that. So they're completely hypothetical, but you get to see the thinking on the spot. And the answer, there's no right or wrong answer. You just want to see, how are they going to problem solve this thing? What is the approach they're going to take? How are they going to think about this? Those are everything I've mentioned here are like intangibles that you can't learn in school, that you can't learn as a CFRE, that are things that you either have or you don't. And the way you have them is that you are motivated to develop them. And it's a lot more, as a person, do I have an external locus of control or internal locus of control? And that is, if we were hiring at BuildGood, that's kind of how we look at hiring. And I think if I was running a fundraising department right now, if I was still working on a nonprofit, I would screen for those same traits.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's, I always used to tell people I hire for attitude over aptitude every single time. I can teach someone some of the technicalities, but I can't teach them how to be a good person or how to be curious or, there's just certain things you can't, right? And so usually when you interview, you can sniff it out in the first kind of 10 seconds, if you've done some homework and are able to see that. So that's helpful. Well, Mike, this has been absolutely amazingly interesting. You certainly have the direct mail market, very, very well thought out. And I think that many of our listeners will really, really appreciate connecting. So if folks wanted to connect with you, how would they do that?
If they're podcast listeners, because they're listening to your podcast, they can find the BuildGood Fundraising Podcast, which is very focused on building a broad base of donors. We don't really get into major gifts. They can find me on LinkedIn. I try to be pretty active, so just look for Mike Dirksen, or they can go to buildgood.com, and there's all the information there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jack. I'm glad we were able to find time for this.